Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the SF Possibilities podcast. I'm here with Greg. There you go. I thought he was going to wave at that point. There you go.
I can't wave.
There he is
Video,
with
audio.
Greg.
Do you wave? Nobody knows you're waving. Hello.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that is a good point to say that if you're listening to this, on Podbean or something like that, we do also put these videos up on YouTube. So if you want to watch this whilst you're listening to us talk, then that's a moment too. And we're here with the wonderful Sophie as well. Hey, there we
Is it
go.
clear? Double wave.
Nice big double wave jazz hands, love it. Um, yeah, and today we're going to focus on some recent reflections from our practice. So as we know, we're always wanting to learn. We're always wanting to keep refining our practice. That's just an ongoing thing that I imagine will remain for as long as we are doing solution focused brief therapy. So that's the aim of today, is to pick up on some recent reflections from our practice. So who am I going to pick on first? Should we go with Let's go with Greg. Over to you. What's a recent reflection from your training and practice?
So I know we were just talking about something earlier, but something else has come up, so I'm just gonna throw that in the mix. So talking a lot in training with people lately about like situations where, say you're asking a question and you either get like an I don't know, or you're doing a follow-up where you say, what's been better? And they say, I don't know, it's just the same. Like those situations where you're not getting much in return from your question in terms of language. Um, and there's that like pressure that starts to mount of like I've got to find another way to ask this, or I've got to find another way to, I've got to have like five ways of asking this question to keep this thing going. Um, and it's like some of it then becomes almost this like self-imposed pressure to find like the perfect solution focused question. Um, and I think I found myself saying to people, just ask something. Like, just ask something to get some more words, and that will then give you something you can ask another solution focused question about. So even if, and again, it's a tricky thing because you have like a line you hold in terms of teaching, and then there's like the real world of practice, which mostly aligns. But I think there are some habits you develop over time that maybe start to change a little bit. And I think one of those things came up around follow-ups, where if somebody says, "Oh, things have been the same," or they've been bad, and it's like you, it's probably okay to just say, "Well, tell me a little bit more about what's been going on," because then you get a bit more of a story, a bit more of a narrative, a bit more of language without necessarily inviting loads of like problem description, but it's that person sharing things. Um, and then it's easier to ask a question. And I think you ask better questions because of it. So rather than just say, "Oh, it's been a bad week. Oh, how'd you get through it?" That's the instant question. Whereas if you kind of know, "Oh, it was tough. I got into an argument with this person, and this stuff happened to me." Okay, well, let's talk about that argument first. Like, how did you manage that argument and get through that and come out of that? So you can kind of slow those things down to amplify like even more success. So I think it's a weird thing to just say, find out more about what happened. But I think it enables you to ask better questions. So but I think I've been saying to people more, just get more language. If you're getting stuck, just ask something to get people talking, and then you'll find questions. What do you guys think? Is that should I be struck off and kicked out of the podcast?
I mean, I don't think so. I think we'll keep you in for like, maybe another 10 minutes, see how you get on.
Okay, good trial period.
Little probation period.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think that I experienced something similar in that I think that if you're not inviting people to describe the things that happened, then you get a bit lost. I can get a bit lost with the detail. And actually, and I think, Greg, we've had this kind of conversation sometimes, actually, just for you, so that you're slightly less lost
Hmm.
with what is going on, like what is happening, that it's completely fine, even if it's not technically a solution focused question, to get the kind of context so that you can then orient yourself usefully for that person in the context of the stuff that's happened to them.
Mm, mm,
Um, so yeah, I think I'm leaning towards you're okay.
yeah. Okay, that's good. It's a relief. It's always a relief.
I really want to say I'm leaning towards you're not okay, just to put you on the spot, but sadly
Go
I
on,
can't
Ben.
on this occasion.
Go
No,
on.
no, I think I agree. I think the only caveat would be that um, it's I think it can be quite a hard skill to teach that,
Mm,
especially when you're learning, um, to give enough space to the sort of like the acknowledgement and the like, tell me more about that for the purpose of contextualizing your solution focused questions and making your solution focused questions as relevant and appropriate and as useful as possible.
mm,
And there can be quite a fine line between that and starting to tip into problem focused talk that's maybe not so useful or not as necessary. So I think it's a really useful skill. It's probably one that takes a bit of practice, I would suggest, and some care in terms of learning it. But yeah, that whole thing of just ask something. Um, yeah, I agree with the sort of the heart, the essence behind that. I remember when we were training at Brief, and the guys saying that the best questions are the ones that produce the best answers,
mm,
right? And sometimes if you spend as much time as we do looking at transcripts and recordings and supervising and looking at our own sessions, you realize that quite often you can have what looks like or sounds like this amazing sort of meticulously worded solution focused question that you're really proud of, and then the client just says, I don't know. And actually another question that you might have fumbled through or tripped over your words actually produces a really rich and lovely answer.
mm.
So that is, I think, the litmus test is not to worry so much about perfectly worded questions, but to concern yourself more with, hearing the client's answers and just giving them space to, um, yeah, to give as much rich description and thought as possible.
Yeah. And there's something about again the intention. We talk about intentions a lot. My intention is to have a solution focused conversation as a whole. And I
Mm,
think that, as you say, will keep me aligned and focused with I won't swerve off and go down that road of, oh, where does that come from? And why did you react that way to that person? I'm not going to go down that road. It is,
mm,
like you say, the intention is there because I know overall this is the direction we're going to be going in this conversation.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I think that's another thing of starting to say, don't, like you say, the questions are important. And at the same time, it's a conversation. So not every utterance that comes out is going to neatly fit into I'm asking about a best hope or a preferred future, so I think it's a most of them will, obviously, but I think there is that thing of I know if you know what you're doing and you have that intention, the language usually I think aligns with that.
Mm. I think there's also something about that I think perhaps sometimes we don't take into account as people who are used to asking solution focused questions and used to assuming that solution focused questions are the most useful thing to be coming out of our mouths. I think we can underestimate the extent to which, for some people, it's a bit of a weird thing to be happening, to be sort of like have question after question after question after question after question. And that these might be questions that you've never thought of before, or that it's really asking you to think in a different way. And that's actually quite intense to have that
Mm,
sort of that interaction with somebody. And so I think that it can be useful to ask them stuff that they 100% know. Because if like you've had a terrible week, you 100% know why you had a terrible week. And so
mm,
so if in that kind of scenario you described there, Greg, that sort of finding out a little bit more about the terrible week allows them to be speaking with confidence about something they know, I think that can then have a knock-on effect so that then when a solution-focused question like how did you get through that argument comes up, it's really they're experiencing a role of like I kind of know what I'm talking about and okay, this
Mm.
is right now I hadn't thought about it like that, but I'm prepared to do it rather than jumping straight into I've had a terrible week, how to get through it. You're kind of like, uh,
Yeah.
I don't know, I don't even know where to start, but you're keeping it with the specifics of their experience and then allowing them to kind of consider that experience in a slightly different way.
Mm. Mm. See, Sophie puts it so much better than we do, Ben.
I know. We're very lucky to have her on the podcast, that's for sure.
You're,
Um,
I was going to do an Italian accent there. I was going to say you're talking rubbish. Stop it, sir.
that's great.
Um,
Um, wow, there's so many tangents I could go down. I will restrain myself. Um, yeah, I think that intention and that purpose is the key, the intention of the overall conversation, like you said,
Mm.
Greg, and building these, and what Sophie was saying there about like questions that for the client they're more natural, they're easier to answer. I think context questions fall into that category as well, like in terms of like say, who were you there with, where was this, what time was that, and then again using that information to build it into your questions that invite possibility, like gently invite possibility.
Mm.
Um, and I always come back to this as an example. It must be absolutely ingrained in my mind. But again, the hammer session that Greg is currently laughing if you can't see him, which just as one practical example of this, I remember speaking with this client who told me about a fight they had got into with another boy at their school, and there had been a hammer present at this fight. And that context, it can be useful from a solution focused perspective if we're using it with the correct intention, right? So if I go down the route of why did you bring a hammer, that maybe isn't taking me down a solution focused route. Whereas what I can ask is, how did you manage to draw a line and make sure that the fight didn't escalate to the point where the hammer was used? Right. So we're using that context, we're using that information to gently invite, either amplification of resources or investigating hopeful futures. Because that conversation, I really have a choice that I can either ask questions that draw attention to the reason they got into the fight and reinforce that idea that this is somebody who loses their temper and loses control and gets angry. Or I can ask questions that invite them to think about how they did manage to draw a line and draw a boundary at some point and stop the fight before anybody got seriously injured. And maybe that starts to paint a picture of someone who does have some self-control that they can build upon. So it's about using those details with that intention of inviting, solution-focused possibility. Um, and the other quick points, whilst I remember them, from a practitioner's point of view, is not to be afraid of repetition. So I think certainly for me, when I was learning, I was really scared of asking the same question again or a similar question again. But it's honestly okay. Clients, 99% of the time, clients don't mind it. And if they do, they'll tell you, and then you just
How,
change it.
how do you mean,
Yeah.
Ben? What do you mean asking the same question again?
So for example, something like the difference question, what difference would that make? Well, I don't know. Okay. If it did make a difference, what might that be? Yeah. Or sometimes I remember thinking, even when a question had been answered, right? So maybe I had asked the difference question a couple of times and the client had answered it. I would start getting in my own head as the practitioner and thinking, oh, I've already asked that question twice. I can't ask it a third time. Can't ask it a fourth time. But again, keep it, if it's working, it's working. Don't overcomplicate it. Be kind to ourselves. Keep it simple. And little phrases like, what do you think? Or if you did know the answer, what might it be? These little things. And pause. Yeah, pause and silence. Like you said, Sophie, these can be strange questions for people. They might not have thought about them before. There's a lot to be said about just being patient and giving people space, I think.
Can I segue from something you were saying
Hmm.
about the kind of, yeah, the
Please
ham
do.
that I think is my sort of reflection. Uh, I've become really, really interested in the way that we live our lives and we do the things that we do and we don't pay particular attention. And if something kind of goes well or we manage to do something, we never sort of pause, we never look at those moments, we never attribute anything to ourselves. We just kind of get on with it because we're all just living. And obviously in solution focused, there is this real opportunity to slow down and pause and look at those moments and find out in those moments what did help you do this? What did you draw on? What characteristics are there about you? What abilities do you have that are kind of part of that having happened? And the kind of like the added element to that I've got kind of really interested in sort of imaginatively is this this idea that in any kind of like given sort of situation, there are actually myriad opportunities to do something different to what you did do. So,
Mm.
and Ben, we've spoken about this before. Not everyone will have done what you ended up doing. And I've got
Yeah,
really interested in zooming in on those kind of tiny moments where there is an equivalent. I mean, no, I'd say kind of like, let's say a fork in the road, but actually I think it's more like a kind of like one of those sort of prisms that has kind of so many different facets that in any kind of
yeah,
like given moment, there's all sorts of different reactions and responses you can have to that. And
yeah.
somehow you managed to do, depending on what you've been describing, you managed to do that thing that turned out to be a little bit useful to you or in line with your values
Mm.
or whatever it is.
Yeah,
And really, like, it's not comfortable for people to answer because we never zoom in that close. We never ask
yeah,
ourselves. And it's
yeah.
not comfortable for a lot of people because they don't want to compliment themselves. They don't want to see good things about
Mm.
themselves. They don't want to believe that all of these things. But I think it's worth just staying with the kind of curiosity and also like in terms of how you phrase the question to be really clear. Like, you know, you received that advice from somebody and you acted on it.
Yeah,
Not everyone receives advice from people and acts on it.
Mm.
So
yeah.
in that moment where you decided to hear that information and do something with it, which turned out to be something really helpful. How come you were in that moment the sort of person that managed to do
Yeah.
something with that information? And then I think in asking that, you have the possibility of people then identifying a kind of ability or a characteristic about them, which is
Mm.
like, okay, well, not saying that you have to use that in the future. That's not a solution focused stance.
Mm.
But how interesting that there is this time when you use that thing. And if that
Yeah,
thing showed up more, what might you notice? Would you be pleased with that? And so like zooming in on these like
yeah,
tiny details, but understanding that what happened didn't have to have happened. There
yeah,
was something about that person that sent it off in that direction that was good for them.
Mm.
yeah.
So that's what I've been
Oh, I
thinking.
love it. I love it so much. I love that idea of the prism, like the prism of options. And yeah, people, it's that whole thing about agency, isn't it? And these questions connecting people again with their agency, that thing of like they're not a, um, yeah, they're not like a backseat passenger in their life. Like they are actually in the driving seat and they can actually influence things.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I love that a lot.
It also makes me think, just to kind of add, because you could, from the other perspective, say, well, if you ended up, you know, having that cigarette when you didn't mean to have the cigarette, for
Yeah,
example, that you, in that moment, you could have made another decision and you made it. But I
yeah,
think it already in the prism is that whatever decision that you made, it's like that kind of
mm,
classic, you must have had a good reason for that. There
yeah,
must have been something,
yeah,
something in the kind of, the pie chart of all the different reasons of why that might have been a good idea.
uh-huh,
Um, and and in that there is some good reason for you to have done that. And so you
yeah,
can still see it as whatever action was taken has
mm,
something of use in it for you, which,
yeah,
perhaps, it's because you needed to feel calmer in that moment. So you had a good reason
yeah,
for smoking that
yeah,
cigarette, even when ideally you would have wanted to have been, going down a different route.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
that
yeah,
allows you to amplify the kind of wanting to kind of feel calm, that that is what I needed.
yeah,
Then ask questions about how else,
mm,
if somehow it wasn't linked to a
yeah,
cigarette, how else
yeah,
would you know that calm was showing up in that moment?
yeah, yeah. So even zooming in on like the portions, the parts of people's reasons for doing things that are useful and helpful to them. Yeah, love it so much. And that phrasing of like, I find myself using this more and more. That phrasing of like, not everybody would have done it that way. Not everybody would have taken that route. So, what is it about you that made that happen? Yeah, reminds me of a client that sat down and this was a teenager, so not an adult yet. And I remember we were in about session 4 of our work together, and they sat down in front of me and just said, "Can I stop you for a moment?" Yeah, okay. I don't think I'm finding these questions very useful. And I was like, and I paused, I collected myself, thought, okay, how could I? Because I tried to tell myself every answer that a client gives can be useful, right, if we view it as such. And I remember using that sort of phrase with them and saying, can I just stop you for a moment and say, not every person, and certainly not every teenager, would be able to sit here in front of me and say, these questions aren't useful right now. So can I just thank you for doing that? And what do you think that shows about you as a person that you're able to stop the session and do that? Yeah. So again, just bring in this phrase of not everybody would do it the way that you did it. Yeah, not
Mm,
everybody would be able to do that.
yeah. Yeah, it's often that thing. There's somebody else I've done some work with, Leon. He talks about wiggle room. Like, start your questions from a place that you have more wiggle room after in case you don't get an answer. So like that's one of my kind of later on questions with wiggle room with people, like especially when trying to amplify success, where it's like, how have you done that? And it's like, oh, it's just something that you have to do. You have to do it as a parent, right? Like it's that thing of I'm not going to think about. I don't want to think about that question. It's like, well, everybody does it, so it's just a thing I can dismiss, and it's like, it feels really good then, and the natural kind of segue to say, not everybody does it. Not everybody does it
Mm,
that way, and almost like it's a nice way to acknowledge as well, to say, look, I'm sure there were plenty of other things you wanted to do or say in that moment that maybe you didn't say or do to your child, or in that situation to your partner or whatever it might be. How on earth did you do that in that situation? Because I'm sure you were thinking about doing other things. Like we all think about doing other things, saying other things. And it just then kind of, yeah, it brings that, it keeps it more genuine, I think, and real, as opposed to like this is another question from the textbook over here kind of thing. Don't know. I love that.
yeah,
Mm.
wriggle room. That's very cool.
Ben, what about you in this last section? What are your reflections, recent practice reflections?
Oh, yeah, I'll keep it short. I've just been enjoying, I have the privilege of getting to train and supervise other people learning the approach. And I'm frequently like encouraged and amazed by some of the things that I see them coming up with. The longer that Greg and I deliver training to people, the more we try to refrain from giving them lists of questions, and the more we try to teach them the intentions and then see what wonderful questions they come up with themselves. And yeah, I'll name drop one of the professionals I've been working with is called Harold, and I was looking at a session with him the other day, and there was this lovely little question where he was asking the client, you know, what would you like to change or be different about this situation? And then he said, or if nothing, what do you already appreciate about it? What would you like to keep? What would you like to maintain? And it was just this little reminder of that phrase, if nothing, if you don't want to change anything about it, you don't want anything to be different about it, that's fine too. What do you appreciate about it? What do you want to keep? What do you want to maintain about that situation? So even just this reminder of we don't even need to push anyone to think about change or differences if they don't want to. Yeah, if they want things to remain the same for different reasons, that could be a good solution focused conversation too.
Mhm.
So,
I'm writing that down because I'm going to steal that. So tell Harold, thank you very much.
yeah, I will. I'll tell him. Yeah, just that little phrase. If nothing,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
what do you appreciate about it? Okay. So there we are. Reflections from recent practice. Thank you so much, guys, for that discussion. And we'll be back again soon talking about how solution focused might help with anxiety, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Yeah, so awesome. And we do want to encourage people to send in thoughts, questions for us. We're really happy to discuss questions, to discuss topics that people want us to focus on. So feel free to send those in to info@sfpossibilities.org.
Say that one more time, nice and clearly.
info@sfpossibilities.org.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Perfect.
Brilliant.
Thank you.